The elegant ballroom at the Grandview Country Club was buzzing with conversation and clinking glasses as the annual Memorial Day charity dinner reached its peak. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables full of well-dressed guests, all gathered to raise funds for wounded veterans. Among the crowd of philanthropists and community leaders, 24-year-old Marcus Thompson stood near the bar, looking distinctly out of place in his ill-fitting rental tuxedo. Marcus had only come because his girlfriend Jennifer's father was one of the event organizers, and skipping wasn't an option if he wanted to stay in her good graces. But as the evening wore on, his patience was wearing thin, especially as he listened to what he considered endless speeches about heroes and sacrifice. "This is such BS," Marcus muttered to his friend Derek, who was nursing his third whiskey. "Look around, man. Half these old guys probably never even left the States during their so-called service." Derek glanced around nervously. "Dude, keep it down. This isn't the place." "No, seriously," Marcus interrupted, his voice getting louder as the alcohol took effect. "My generation has to deal with student loans, housing prices through the roof, and a screwed-up job market, but we're supposed to feel sorry for these guys who got free college and healthcare for life just because they wore a uniform 50 years ago." Several nearby guests turned to look at them, but Marcus was just getting started. His eyes landed on a small, frail-looking man sitting alone at a corner table. The elderly gentleman appeared to be in his mid-70s, with thinning white hair and thick glasses. His simple black suit looked like it had been purchased decades ago, and his hands shook slightly as he slowly ate his dinner. "Perfect example right there," Marcus said, pointing directly at the old man. "Look at that guy. What could someone like that have possibly done? Probably spent the war pushing papers in some office while pretending to be a soldier." Jennifer grabbed Marcus's arm. "Stop it. You're being incredibly rude." "I'm being honest," Marcus shot back. "These charity dinners are just guilt trips. We're supposed to throw money at every old guy who claims he was some kind of war hero, but half of them probably never even saw combat." The elderly man at the corner table slowly turned his head toward the commotion. When their eyes met, Marcus felt a strange chill, but he was too drunk and angry to back down. "What are you looking at, Pops?" Marcus called out across the room. "Don't like hearing the truth." A hush fell over the surrounding tables. Jennifer's face went pale with embarrassment, and Derek tried to pull Marcus away, but he shrugged off his friend's grip. The old man carefully set down his fork, dabbed his mouth with his napkin, and slowly stood up. Despite his small stature, maybe 5'6" and 140 pounds soaking wet, there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded attention. He walked over to Marcus with measured steps, his back straight despite his age. "Excuse me, son," the old man said in a quiet voice tinged with a slight Texas drawl. "I couldn't help but overhear your comments. I was wondering if we might have a word." Marcus looked down at the elderly gentleman with a smirk. "Sure, Grandpa. What's on your mind?" "Well, I heard you expressing some strong opinions about veterans, particularly older ones like myself. I thought maybe you'd like to know a little bit about what some of us actually did during our service." "Let me guess," Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You were some kind of big shot in Vietnam, right?" "Let me tell you something, old man, my generation doesn't buy into that mythology anymore. We know most of you guys just sat in safe zones while the real fighting was done by someone else." The old man nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand why you might think that. Tell me, what's your name, son?" "Marcus Thompson. And before you ask, no, I never served." "Why would I? What's the point of risking my life for a country that doesn't give a damn about people my age?" "Well, Marcus, my name is William Bill Patterson. And you're absolutely right about one thing, a lot of us did spend time in relatively safe areas." Bill reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "But some of us saw a different kind of service." From his wallet, Bill extracted a small, faded photograph and handed it to Marcus. This was taken in January 1968, about 3 weeks before the Tet Offensive. Marcus glanced at the photo dismissively. It showed a group of young soldiers in combat gear, their faces painted with camouflage, standing in what looked like thick jungle. They couldn't have been much older than Marcus himself. "A bunch of kids playing dress-up," Marcus said, trying to hand the photo back. "What's your point?" "Look closer," Bill said gently. "Second row, third from the right." Marcus looked again, and his expression faltered slightly. One of the young soldiers in the photo bore a striking resemblance to the old man standing before him, but this version was lean, muscular, and carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a combat veteran. "That's you?" Marcus asked, his voice less certain now. "That was taken during my second tour with the 1st Cavalry Division," Bill explained. "I was a helicopter door gunner and crew chief. 23 years old, full of the same kind of fire I see in you now." "That was taken during my second tour with the 1st Cavalry Division," Bill explained. "I was a helicopter door gunner and crew chief. 23 years old, full of the same kind of fire I see in you now." A small crowd had begun to gather around them, drawn by the increasingly tense conversation. Jennifer looked mortified, but she couldn't bring herself to interrupt. "Door gunner, huh?" Marcus said, his bravado returning. "So you sat in a helicopter taking potshots at farmers. Real heroic stuff." Bill's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Marcus, have you ever heard of the Battle of Ia Drang?" "Should I have?" "How about Landing Zone X-ray?" Marcus shrugged. "Nope. Like I said, you guys lost that war. Not much worth remembering." Bill reached into his wallet again and pulled out another photograph, this one showing a helicopter with significant battle damage, bullet holes throughout the fuselage and one of the rotors clearly damaged. "This was my bird, a UH-1D Huey, after a mission to extract wounded soldiers from LZ X-ray," Bill said quietly. "We took over 200 rounds of enemy fire during that extraction. My pilot was wounded, my co-pilot was unconscious, and I had to help fly the helicopter back to base while returning fire at the same time." Marcus stared at the photograph, his earlier smugness beginning to fade. "But that wasn't the hard part," Bill continued. "The hard part was what we found when we got to that landing zone." The ballroom had grown noticeably quieter, with more and more guests stopping their conversations to listen. "LZ X-ray was supposed to be a routine insertion," Bill explained. "Drop off some troops, pick up some wounded, head home. What we found instead was the aftermath of one of the most brutal battles of the entire war. American soldiers had been fighting for their lives for 3 days straight, surrounded and outnumbered 5-1. Bill's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see his hands trembling slightly. "When we landed, there were bodies everywhere. American boys, most of them younger than you, scattered across that landing zone like broken dolls. Some of them were still alive, crying for their mothers, begging us to get them out of there." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, no longer able to meet Bill's eyes. "My job was to provide covering fire while the medics loaded the wounded onto my helicopter," Bill continued. "But there were so many wounded and so few aircraft that we had to make choices. Terrible choices about who we could save and who we had to leave behind. I didn't know," Marcus began, but Bill wasn't finished. "On our third trip into that hell, we were coming in to pick up the last of the wounded when we took a direct hit from a rocket-propelled grenade. The explosion killed my gunner and shattered my left leg. I should have been evacuated, but there were still American boys down there who needed help." Bill pulled up his left pant leg slightly, revealing a prosthetic limb that Marcus hadn't noticed before. "I spent the next 4 hours lying in the door of that helicopter, bleeding and barely conscious, laying down covering fire while we made 6 more trips to get those boys out. By the time we were done, we had evacuated 47 wounded soldiers. 47 American boys who got to go home to their families because we refused to leave them behind." The silence in the ballroom was now complete. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, listening to the old man's quiet testimony. "How many?" Marcus's voice cracked. How many didn't make it? Bill's eyes grew distant. 79 American soldiers died at LZ X-ray. 79 boys who should have lived long, full lives. Should have gotten married, had children, built careers. Instead, they died in a jungle on the other side of the world, fighting for a cause that half the country had already given up on. Marcus felt his legs go weak. Jesus Christ. You want to know what we accomplished over there? Bill asked, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. We didn't win the war, you're right about that. But we brought each other home. We looked out for our brothers, and we never left anyone behind if we could help it. Bill reached into his wallet one more time and pulled out a small, tarnished medal. This is a Distinguished Flying Cross. I got it for those missions at LZ X-ray. But you know what? I never wanted it. I wanted those 79 boys to go home instead. He handed the medal to Marcus, who took it with shaking hands. You think we were just playing soldier, Bill continued. You think we didn't earn the respect we're shown. But let me tell you something, son, every veteran in this room has stories like mine. Stories about friends who didn't come home, about split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, about carrying wounds that never really healed. Marcus stared down at the medal, feeling its weight both physically and emotionally. When we came home from Vietnam, there were no parades, no thank-you dinners like this one. We were called baby killers, war criminals, losers. We were spit on in airports and told we were murderers. A lot of us never got over that. A lot of us never got over what we saw over there. Bill's voice grew softer. So when I see young people like you dismissing our service, it hurts. Not because I need your approval, but because it means we failed to pass on the lessons we learned. It means another generation might have to learn those lessons the hard way. Marcus finally looked up from the medal, his eyes filled with tears. Mr. Patterson, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Bill said, not unkindly. How could you? We don't talk about these things much. Too painful for most of us. Jennifer stepped forward, her own eyes wet with tears. Mr. Patterson, thank you for sharing your story. Marcus doesn't normally. Actually, he does, Bill interrupted gently. And that's okay. He's young, he's angry about the state of the world, and he's looking for someone to blame. I understand that. I was the same way at his age. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What happened to you after the war? Bill's smile was sad. Same thing that happened to a lot of us. I came home to a country that didn't want me. Took me 20 years to get my head straight. Lost my first marriage, couldn't hold a job, drank too much. Finally got help in the late 80s when the VA started taking PTSD seriously. He gestured around the ballroom. This dinner isn't about glory or hero worship. It's about making sure the next generation of veterans gets the help they need when they come home. It's about making sure they don't have to wait 20 years like I did. Marcus clutched the medal tighter. What can I do? How can I make this right? Learn, Bill said simply. Read about history, talk to veterans, understand what really happened before you judge. And maybe, if you're feeling generous, consider volunteering at the VA hospital. We've got a lot of old soldiers there who could use some company from a young person who wants to listen to their stories. As if on cue, the evening's host approached the microphone on the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. We have a very special guest with us tonight, and I'd like to take a moment to honor his service. A spotlight swung across the room and landed on Bill Patterson, who looked surprised and uncomfortable with the sudden attention. William Patterson served 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter crew chief and door gunner with the 1st Cavalry Division. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star for Valor, the Purple Heart, and the Air Medal with 17 oak leaf clusters. Marcus's jaw dropped. 17 oak leaf clusters. Bill looked embarrassed. Each cluster represents 5 additional awards. It just means I flew a lot of missions. Ladies and gentlemen, the host continued, Sergeant Patterson flew over 200 combat missions in Vietnam and was directly responsible for saving the lives of more than 300 wounded soldiers. The applause started slowly but built to a thunderous ovation. Marcus found himself clapping harder than anyone, tears streaming down his face as he finally understood the magnitude of his earlier ignorance. As the applause died down, Bill sat back down heavily, clearly exhausted by the attention and the evening's events. Marcus approached him again, still holding the medal. Sergeant Patterson, I don't know how to apologize for what I said earlier. I was wrong about everything. Bill looked up at him with tired but kind eyes. Son, the fact that you can admit you were wrong tells me everything I need to know about your character. Most people your age would double down on their ignorance rather than face the truth. Marcus nodded, then pulled out his phone. Would it be possible to get your contact information? I'd like to learn more, maybe visit the VA hospital with you sometime. Bill smiled. I'd like that. But I have one condition. Anything. Don't treat me like a hero. I was just a young man doing my job in an impossible situation. The real heroes are the ones who didn't make it home. As they exchanged contact information, Jennifer watched in amazement at the transformation in her boyfriend. The arrogant, disrespectful young man from earlier in the evening had been replaced by someone genuinely humbled and eager to make amends. Mr. Patterson, she said, thank you for your patience with Marcus tonight. And thank you for your service. Bill chuckled. Thank you for raising a young man who's willing to learn from his mistakes. That gives me hope for the future. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus carefully handed the Distinguished Flying Cross back to Bill. Thank you for letting me hold this, he said. I'll never forget tonight. Bill pocketed the medal and stood slowly, his age showing in the deliberate way he moved. Marcus, can I tell you something? Of course. Tonight was the first time in over 50 years that someone your age asked me about Vietnam because they wanted to understand, not because they wanted to argue. That means more to me than any medal ever could. As Bill made his way slowly toward the exit, Marcus called after him. Sergeant Patterson. The old man turned. Thank you for bringing those boys home. And thank you for not giving up on me tonight. Bill smiled, and for a moment, Marcus could see the young soldier from the photograph shining through the weathered features. Never give up on anyone, son. That's the most important lesson I learned in Vietnam. As Bill disappeared into the crowd, Marcus stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by guests who had witnessed his transformation. Jennifer took his hand. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Marcus nodded, still processing everything he had learned. I have a lot of reading to do. A lot of apologizing to catch up on. Derek approached them, having sobered up considerably during Bill's testimony. Man, I had no idea. None of us did. That's the problem, Marcus said. We don't know because we've never bothered to ask. We've been so busy feeling sorry for ourselves that we forgot to appreciate what others sacrificed for us. As they left the country club that night, Marcus made a mental note to call the VA hospital first thing Monday morning. He had a lot to learn about service, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of those who answer their country's call, even when that call leads them into hell. The old soldier had taught him that true honor wasn't about glory or recognition, it was about doing your duty when it mattered most, looking out for your brothers, and never leaving anyone behind. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to listen, they'll share their stories with a young man who thought he knew everything but was brave enough to admit he knew nothing at all. Don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to the channel for more short stories.